Hey guys, tonight we begin with the surprisingly mundane and unexpectedly tedious world of lemurs, those wide-eyed primates who spend their days doing absolutely nothing exciting, while the internet makes them seem adorable and fascinating. While nature documentaries paint them as mystical Madagascar marvels, the truth is, being a lemur is incredibly boring. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're 3 weeks old now, which in lemur years translates roughly to old enough to be disappointed in yourself but young enough to blame it on inexperience. Your body has grown just enough that your mother no longer looks at you like you're a small, screaming mistake she made after a particularly wild night of fruit fermentation. Instead, she looks at you like you're a medium-sized screaming mistake with coordination issues. The morning sun filters through the canopy with the lazy confidence of someone who knows they'll be back tomorrow regardless of how today goes. You cling to a branch that seemed perfectly reasonable when you grabbed it, but now feels about as reliable as a campaign promise. Below you, the forest floor stretches away like a green carpet. Someone forgot to vacuum for about 50 million years. Your first real attempt at independent jumping happens on a Tuesday, though you don't know it's Tuesday because calendars haven't been invented yet, and even if they had, you'd probably try to eat them. You're perched on what your developing brain categorizes as definitely a good branch when you spot another branch approximately 3 feet away. In the complex mathematical calculations of your juvenile mind, 3 feet might as well be 3 inches or 3 miles. Distance is more of a suggestion than a measurable quantity. You crouch, feeling the branch bend slightly under your weight, which should have been your first warning, but instead feels like the tree is giving you a little encouraging bounce. Your tail flicks with what you imagine is graceful preparation, but actually resembles someone trying to swat a particularly persistent fly. You take a deep breath, filling your tiny lungs with the scent of decomposing leaves and your own misplaced confidence. The jump begins with promise. For approximately 0.3 seconds, you are airborne and magnificent, a small furry comet streaking through the dappled sunlight with all the grace of a ballet dancer who's just discovered they have opposable thumbs. Your arms stretch forward, your legs extend behind you, and for this brief moment, you understand what it means to fly. Then physics introduces itself with the enthusiasm of an overly aggressive sports coach. You clear exactly half the distance before gravity remembers you exist and decides to have a conversation about realistic expectations. Your trajectory, which started as a confident arc, transforms into something that could generously be called controlled falling, and more accurately described as an object lesson in hubris. You don't so much land on the target branch as collide with it, using your face as the primary point of contact. The branch, to its credit, catches you. Sort of. You hang there for a moment, upside down, wondering if this is how you're supposed to travel between trees, or if you've discovered a completely new way to be wrong about something. Your tail wraps around the branch with the desperate enthusiasm of someone grabbing onto the last life preserver on a sinking ship. After some undignified scrambling that involves parts of your anatomy you didn't know could bend in those directions, you manage to right yourself. You sit on the branch, breathing heavily, and wondering if anyone witnessed this display of athletic prowess. A nearby gecko gives you a look that clearly says, "I've been watching, and I'm not impressed," then disappears behind a leaf with the kind of casual dismissal that cuts deeper than any critique. But you're young, and young means resilient in the way that rubber balls and small children are resilient. You bounce back from disasters that would traumatize reasonable adults, so you try again, and again. Each attempt teaches you something new about the relationship between ambition and reality, though the lessons come packaged in experiences you'd rather forget. By the end of your first week of serious jumping practice, you've developed a technique that could charitably be called enthusiastic, and more accurately described as statistically likely to result in injury. You approach each leap with the confidence of someone who has never heard the phrase learning curve, and the execution skills of someone who is still very much on it. The trees begin to feel like a conspiracy. Branches that looked perfectly positioned when you were planning your route suddenly seem to shift just as you commit to jumping. What appeared to be a sturdy handhold reveals itself to be a cluster of leaves held together by wishful thinking. The forest develops a personality, and that personality enjoys practical jokes at your expense. You start to suspect that gravity has a personal vendetta against you. Other lemurs make jumping look effortless, flowing from branch to branch like water finding its way downhill. When you jump, it's more like water trying to flow uphill while carrying a backpack full of rocks and questionable life choices. You begin to wonder if you receive defective jumping instincts, or if everyone else is just showing off. Your mother watches your practice sessions with the expression of someone observing a traffic accident in slow motion, horrified but unable to look away. She offers occasional advice, usually in the form of urgent squeaking that translates roughly to, "Not like that," or "Why are you doing it that way?" Her guidance is well-intentioned, but about as helpful as a weather forecast that just says weather will occur. The breakthrough comes on a morning when you're not trying to impress anyone, including yourself. You're simply moving from one branch to another because there's a particularly promising-looking fruit just out of reach. No dramatic preparation, no mathematical calculations of distance and velocity, just a casual hop across a gap that happens to be exactly within your capabilities. You land cleanly, grab the fruit, and only afterward realize that you've successfully completed a jump without any part of your body making unplanned contact with solid wood. The fruit tastes sweeter because of this small victory, though it might just be a particularly good fruit. You decide not to overthink it. From that moment, jumping becomes less of an ordeal and more of a skill. You're still not graceful. Graceful is for creatures who learn to move before they developed opinions about how movement should work, but you're functional. Your success rate improves from occasional accident to usually on purpose, which represents a significant upgrade in your quality of life. At 3 weeks old, your approach to nutrition can best be described as experimentally optimistic. Everything in your environment falls into one of two categories: definitely food, and probably food. The concept of not food hasn't fully developed in your understanding of the world, which leads to what your mother will later refer to as your creative eating phase, assuming she survives the experience. The forest presents itself as an endless buffet, designed by someone with a twisted sense of humor and no concern for customer satisfaction. Leaves come in dozens of colors and shapes, each one calling to you with the promise of being exactly what you need to solve the persistent problem of being hungry. Your instincts, such as they are, tell you that green things are generally safe, red things are exciting, and purple things are probably delicious. Your instincts, it turns out, are about as reliable as a map drawn by someone who's never been to the place they're mapping. Your first major dietary adventure begins with a leaf that catches your attention because it's the most beautiful shade of red you've ever seen. In your 3-week experience of colors, this represents the pinnacle of visual appeal. The leaf practically glows in the morning sunlight, its surface glossy and inviting like nature's version of candy. Your mouth begins watering before you've even decided to eat it, which your developing brain interprets as a sure sign that this leaf was specifically created for your consumption. You approach the leaf with the reverence of someone discovering treasure. It's attached to a vine that winds around your current branch like a convenient snack delivery system. You pluck it carefully, holding it up to examine its perfection. It smells like flowers and promises, with just a hint of something that might be danger, but is more likely just complexity. Sophisticated food, you decide. Food for mature lemurs who appreciate nuance. The first bite is everything you hoped for. Sweet, with a texture that's both crisp and tender, and a flavor that seems to contain every good thing you've ever tasted, plus several good things you didn't know existed. You chew thoughtfully, savoring what is clearly a landmark moment in your culinary development. This, you think, is what eating is supposed to be about. The second bite is equally wonderful. The third bite makes you pause because something feels different, though you can't quite identify what. The fourth bite never happens because by then, you're too busy discovering what it feels like when your tongue decides it no longer wants to fit in your mouth. The leaf, it turns out, belongs to a plant that the local wildlife community has collectively agreed to avoid. This agreement exists for good reasons, reasons that become apparent as your mouth begins to feel like someone has filled it with warm sand mixed with regret. Your tongue swells with the enthusiasm of bread dough that's just remembered it has a job to do, and your saliva takes on the consistency and flavor of tree sap that's been left in the sun too long. You spend the next 4 hours drooling uncontrollably while making sounds that attract the attention of every creature within a half-mile radius. Most of them come to investigate, take one look at your condition, and leave with the kind of hurried departure that suggests they know exactly what you've done and want no part of the consequences. Your mother finds you hanging upside down from a branch, letting gravity help with the drooling process, your eyes watering and your face expressing the kind of profound disappointment that usually comes with much larger life mistakes. She gives you a look that combines sympathy with the sort of exasperation reserved for children who've just learned important lessons in the most difficult way possible. The recovery process involves drinking approximately your body weight in rainwater, collected in the hollow of a tree trunk, while your mother keeps watch and occasionally makes what you interpret as encouraging noises that might actually be commentary on your intelligence level. The swelling gradually subsides, your tongue remembers how to fit in your mouth, and your ability to make recognizable sounds returns along with your dignity. This experience introduces you to the concept of consequences, though you don't yet have the vocabulary to name what you've learned. What you understand is that beautiful doesn't always mean edible, and that some mistakes announce themselves loudly enough to attract an audience. Your approach to food selection becomes more conservative for exactly 2 days. Then you discover a cluster of berries that are the most appealing shade of purple you've ever seen, and your memory of recent unpleasantness fades in the face of new possibility. These berries are different, you reason. These berries are clearly meant to be eaten, probably by sophisticated lemurs with discerning taste, and enough experience to recognize quality food when they see it. The berries, as it happens, are mildly hallucinogenic. You spend an afternoon convinced that the trees are having philosophical conversations about the meaning of bark, while colors seem more colorful, and sounds develop textures you can almost taste. Your mother finds you staring intently at a flower for 3 hours, occasionally nodding as if you're receiving important information from it. This experience is less unpleasant than the leaf incident, but more confusing. The world becomes a place where cause and effect operate according to dream logic, and you develop a temporary but passionate interest in the mathematical properties of shadows. When the effects wear off, you're left with the vague memory of having understood something profound about existence, though you can't remember what it was or why it seemed important. By your 4th week of independent eating, you've developed a more systematic approach to food evaluation. Step 1 involves observing what other lemurs eat, though you've noticed that what works for them doesn't always work for you. Step 2 involves smelling potential food items extensively, though your nose is still calibrating its ability to distinguish between safe and interesting. Step 3 involves taking very small bites and waiting to see what happens, which has proven to be the most reliable method, despite being the least satisfying approach to meals. You begin to categorize the forest's offerings more precisely. Leaves that are ordinary green and somewhat boring are almost always safe, though they taste like you're chewing disappointment flavored with chlorophyll. Bright red leaves are to be approached with caution, if at all, though some of them are delicious enough to be worth the risk if you're feeling adventurous and have nothing important planned for the rest of the day. Fruits present their own challenges. Size doesn't correlate with safety, color doesn't predict flavor, and smell can be misleading in ways that suggest the forest has a sense of humor. You learn to read the subtle signs, how insects interact with different fruits, which ones have been partially eaten by other creatures, and most importantly, which ones your mother steers you away from with increasing urgency. The breakthrough comes when you discover that the most reliable food is often the least exciting food. The brown, spotted bananas that don't photograph well are consistently sweet and safe. The plain green leaves that look like they were designed by someone with no imagination are nutritious and never cause your tongue to swell or your perception of reality to become negotiable. This realization represents a form of growing up, though you don't recognize it as such at the time. You're simply learning that survival often involves choosing the practical option over the exciting one, which is a lesson that will apply to more areas of your life than you currently understand. Living in a lemur troop is like being part of a family where everyone has strong opinions. No one agrees on basic facts, and the only privacy comes from climbing higher in a tree than anyone else wants to follow you. At 3 weeks old, you're still figuring out the social dynamics of a community that communicates through a complex mixture of sounds, gestures, and mutual grooming that seems to follow rules no one has bothered to explain to you. Your first serious attempt at social interaction begins with what you observe to be a fundamental troop activity: grooming. Every morning, lemurs pair off and spend considerable time carefully cleaning each other's fur, removing debris, and engaging in what appears to be the lemur equivalent of gossip. This looks like something you can handle. How difficult can it be to clean someone else's fur when you've been observing the process for weeks? You approach an older female who's sitting alone in the morning sun, her fur gleaming silver-grey in the light. She's approximately twice your size and exudes the kind of calm authority that suggests she's survived enough seasons to have opinions about everything. You climb up beside her with what you imagine is confident social grace, but probably looks more like a small furry creature with questionable motor skills attempting to be suave. She notices your approach and gives you the kind of look that says, "This should be interesting," while also preparing for disappointment. You position yourself at what seems like an appropriate grooming distance and reach out with your tiny hands to begin the delicate work of fur maintenance. The first problem becomes apparent immediately. You're not entirely sure where your own hands are in relation to the rest of your body. Grooming requires precise finger movements, and your fingers are still operating on a slight delay, like you're controlling them through a connection with poor signal quality. You reach for what you think is a tangle in her shoulder fur, and instead poke her in what turns out to be a ticklish spot just behind her ear. She jerks away with a sound that's somewhere between surprise and mild annoyance. You interpret this as encouragement. Clearly you've found a spot that needed attention, so you try again, this time with more enthusiasm. Your coordination, which seemed adequate when you were just moving through trees, proves insufficient for the delicate work of social grooming. What follows can best be described as an interpretive dance performance titled Young Lemur Discovers Personal Space Boundaries Through Trial and Error. You attempt to groom her back, and somehow end up tangled in your own tail. You try to clean her ears and accidentally grab a handful of the leaves she's been sitting on. Your grooming technique develops its own chaotic rhythm that bears no resemblance to the gentle, methodical approach you've observed other lemurs using. The older female tolerates this for approximately 3 minutes before giving you a gentle but firm push that sends you sliding down the branch like a small furry toboggan. She doesn't seem angry, just resigned to the fact that you're going to need more practice before you're ready for advanced social activities. You sit at the bottom of the branch, looking up at her with the expression of someone who's just realized that watching something and doing something are entirely different skills. Your next social experiment involves the morning sun worship ritual, a daily ceremony where the entire troop faces east and spreads their arms to catch the first rays of sunlight. This appears to be a straightforward activity: face the sun, spread arms, absorb warmth. Even you, with your limited experience and questionable judgment, can handle something this simple. The first challenge is determining which direction is east. Your sense of direction is still developing, which is to say it exists primarily as a concept you've heard about but haven't actually implemented. You observe the other lemurs arranging themselves in what appears to be a coordinated formation, and position yourself at what seems like an appropriate spot in the group. The sun begins to rise, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink that make the whole forest look like it's been designed by someone with excellent taste and unlimited resources. The other lemurs spread their arms and tilt their faces upward with the synchronized precision of a well-rehearsed performance. You spread your arms and tilt your face in what you're confident is the same direction. You spend 20 peaceful minutes warming your backside while facing completely the wrong direction. The morning sun bathes your back with gentle heat, while your face remains in cool shadow, which feels pleasant but somehow different from what the other lemurs seem to be experiencing. You assume this is just your unique way of participating in the ritual. Perhaps you're an innovative thinker who's discovered an improved method of sun worship. It's only when the ceremony ends and the other lemurs begin to disperse that you realize you've been facing west the entire time. The looks they give you range from puzzled to sympathetic, with a few that suggest they're impressed by your commitment to doing something completely wrong with such confidence. Your communication skills prove to be another area requiring significant development. Lemur vocal communication involves a sophisticated range of sounds that convey different types of information: warnings, greetings, territorial claims, and social commentary. Your vocal range, while enthusiastic, lacks precision. Your attempts at friendly greetings often come out sounding like territorial challenges. Your efforts to express contentment frequently get interpreted as distress calls. You try to tell another young lemur about the interesting beetle you discovered that morning, but your description comes out as a series of excited squeaks that the other lemur interprets as a warning about approaching predators. This triggers a brief panic where half the troop scrambles for higher branches while scanning the forest for threats that don't exist. When they realize the false alarm came from you, they give you the kind of looks usually reserved for car alarms that go off at 3 a.m. for no apparent reason. Your attempt to compliment an adult male's impressive jumping skills results in a vocalization that he interprets as a challenge to his authority. He responds with a display of dominance that involves making himself look larger, producing sounds that clearly mean "back off," and staring at you with an intensity that makes you suddenly interested in being somewhere else. You spend the rest of the morning hiding behind your mother, who explains your behavior to the other adults with sounds that probably translate to "he's young and doesn't know what he's saying." The breakthrough in your social development comes not through any particular skill you develop, but through the gradual recognition that good intentions can compensate for poor execution, at least among family members. The other lemurs in your troop begin to anticipate your social missteps. and develop a kind of affectionate tolerance for your unique approach to group living. When you attempt to participate in group grooming sessions, they position themselves strategically to minimize the chaos you might cause while still including you in the activity. When you face the wrong direction during morning rituals, they gently redirect you without making a big production of your mistake. When your communications are unclear, they listen patiently and respond to what they think you meant rather than what you actually said. You're learning, slowly but steadily, that being part of a social group requires both technical skills and emotional intelligence. The technical skills, grooming, vocalizing, ritual participation will improve with practice. The emotional intelligence involves understanding that other lemurs have their own needs, preferences, and personal space requirements that deserve respect. By the end of your 4th week, you've achieved a basic level of social competence. You can participate in group activities without causing major disruptions. Your grooming technique has improved to the point where other lemurs don't automatically move away when you approach. Your vocalizations, while still imprecise, fall within the range of normal lemur conversation rather than emergency broadcasting. You're beginning to understand that social skills, like jumping and food selection, require practice and patience. The other lemurs in your troop are willing to be patient with your learning process, because they remember being young themselves, and because the alternative, a socially incompetent lemur, is more trouble for everyone than it's worth. The forest around you continues its ancient rhythm, indifferent to your small struggles with coordination and communication. The sun rises and sets according to schedules that were established long before you were born and will continue long after you're gone. But within this vast, impersonal system, you're carving out a small space where your particular combination of enthusiasm and inexperience is gradually becoming something resembling competence. You're still young enough to make mistakes without permanent consequences, still small enough that your errors are more cute than dangerous, still new enough that each day brings discoveries that will seem obvious to your future self. The forest is teaching you its lessons through direct experience, one fumbled jump and misdirected greeting at a time. In the canopy above, your mother watches your daily adventures with the complex mixture of pride and anxiety that comes with watching someone you care about. Learn to navigate a world that doesn't provide instruction manuals. She knows that your current awkwardness will fade, that your coordination will improve, that your social skills will develop into something approaching sophistication. But she also knows that growing up means learning to handle increasingly complex challenges, and that your current struggles with jumping between branches are just preparation for the more complicated business of adult life in Madagascar's forests. For now, though, you're still young enough that your biggest concerns involve finding good fruit and figuring out which end of a branch is the stable end. The afternoon light filters through the leaves in patterns that shift with each breeze, creating a constantly changing mosaic of light and shadow on the forest floor below. You hang from a branch, using the swaying motion to help digest your latest meal, while contemplating the interesting way tree bark looks different depending on the angle of the light. These are the moments that will fade from your memory. As you grow older, the simple pleasure of hanging upside down on a pleasant afternoon, the satisfaction of a belly full of safe food, the security of knowing your family is nearby. But they're also the foundation on which your adult confidence will be built, the proof that the world, despite its challenges and complexities, can also be a place of simple contentments and small victories. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, branches to jump between, foods to evaluate, social interactions to navigate. But tonight, as the sun sets and the forest settles into its evening routine, you're content to be exactly where you are, a small, slightly clumsy lemur, learning to live in a world designed for creatures much more graceful and experienced than yourself, but managing to find your place in it nonetheless. You're 6 weeks old now, which, in the complex mathematics of lemur development, translates to old enough to have opinions about everything and young enough to be spectacularly wrong about most of them. Your body has stretched into proportions that suggest you might eventually grow into something resembling a functional adult lemur, though for now you look like someone took a regular lemur and put it through a photocopier that was running low on toner. The morning mist clings to the forest canopy like a blanket that doesn't quite want to get up yet, and you find yourself perched on a branch that's become as familiar as your own tail, which, considering your relationship with your tail, might not be saying much. But familiarity breeds a particular kind of restlessness, the kind that whispers suggestions about what might be waiting just beyond the comfortable boundaries of everything you've ever known. Your world, until this moment, has consisted of approximately 3 trees and the airspace between them. These trees have names in your mind, though the names are more concepts than words. home tree where your family sleeps, breakfast tree, where the reliable fruit grows, and afternoon nap tree, which catches the sun at exactly the right angle for optimal dozing. This has been sufficient territory for a lemur, whose biggest concern was whether to eat the green leaves or the slightly greener leaves. But 6 weeks of life have given you something dangerous: confidence in your jumping abilities and curiosity about what lies beyond the horizon. The horizon, in your case, is about 20 feet away and partially obscured by a vine that's been growing there since before your great-grandmother was born, but it might as well be the edge of the known universe. Your first expedition beyond the familiar triangle of trees begins on a morning when your mother is distracted by the complex social politics of adult lemur life, specifically a disagreement with a neighbor about fruit tree ownership rights that involves a lot of aggressive staring and strategic positioning. While she's occupied with this important diplomatic work, you slip away with the stealth of someone who's just discovered they can move without asking permission. The fourth tree in your expanding world is exactly 12 feet from afternoon nap tree, which in your previous calculations had made it impossibly far away. Now, with your improved jumping skills and inflated sense of your own capabilities, 12 feet seems like a reasonable morning commute. The tree itself is larger than your familiar trio, with bark that's a different shade of brown and leaves that catch the light in unfamiliar ways. You approach this new territory with the caution of an explorer who's read about dangerous expeditions, but hasn't quite internalized that the dangers might apply to him personally. The first branch you land on creaks in a way that none of your home trees have ever creaked, which is either a sign that this tree has more character or a warning that your weight-to-branch strength calculations need updating. Climbing higher, you discover that this tree offers a completely different perspective on your familiar world. From this angle, you can see the tops of home tree and breakfast tree, and beyond them, a vista that stretches farther than you've ever imagined possible. The forest extends in all directions, like a green ocean frozen in the act of having waves, with emergent trees rising like islands and valleys between them that disappear into mysterious shadow. It's your first real glimpse of Madagascar as something larger than your personal backyard, and the revelation is both thrilling and slightly terrifying. You've spent 6 weeks thinking of yourself as living in a complete world, only to discover that your complete world is actually a small corner of something unimaginably vast. It's like realizing that what you thought was your house is actually just one room, and there are whole other rooms you didn't know existed, and probably a kitchen somewhere, and maybe even a basement full of things you can't imagine. The new tree also introduces you to the concept of territorial boundaries in a more concrete way than you've previously experienced. About 15 minutes into your exploration of the upper branches, you encounter another lemur, an adult male who's been living in this tree for longer than you've been alive, and has strong opinions about uninvited visitors. He doesn't immediately attack, or even threaten you. Instead, he gives you a look that clearly communicates, "You seem lost, little one, and I'm willing to give you the benefit of the doubt that this is an innocent mistake rather than a deliberate invasion." His posture is relaxed but alert, like someone who's confident in their ability to handle any situation that might develop, but is hoping it won't come to that. You realize, with the sudden clarity that comes with being completely out of your depth, that you've wandered into someone else's living room without being invited. The social protocols for this situation weren't covered in your informal education, mainly because no one expected you to travel this far from home without supervision. Your response is to freeze completely, like a small furry statue that suddenly developed an intense interest in becoming invisible. The standoff lasts for what feels like several hours, but is probably closer to 30 seconds. The older lemur continues to evaluate you with the patient attention of someone trying to decide whether you're a problem that needs solving or just a curiosity that will solve itself. Finally, he makes a sound that you interpret as, "You don't belong here, but you're too small to be a real threat, so I'm going to ignore you until you go away." This seems like excellent advice. You begin a strategic retreat that attempts to balance dignity with speed, climbing down and jumping back toward familiar territory with what you hope looks like confidence but probably resembles panic with better coordination. The older lemur watches your departure with what might be amusement, like someone observing a neighbor's cat that's gotten confused about which yard belongs to whom. Back in the safety of afternoon nap tree, you spend considerable time processing what you've learned. The world is bigger than you thought, which is exciting. Other lemurs have their own territories and their own rules, which is important information for future reference. And exploration carries risks that aren't immediately obvious, which is the kind of lesson that seems more valuable in retrospect than it did while you were learning it. But the expedition also left you with something more powerful than caution: a map. Not a physical map, obviously, but a mental model of your expanded world that includes new possibilities and new destinations. The tree you visited is now part of your known universe, and beyond it, you glimpsed other trees, other possibilities, other adventures waiting for a lemur, brave enough or foolish enough to seek them out. Over the next week, you systematically expand your territory in careful increments. Tree 5 is only 8 feet from Tree 4, and uninhabited except for a family of insects who are too small to object to your presence. Tree 6 offers excellent fruit, but requires navigating past a vine that seems to exist solely to tangle unwary travelers. Tree 7 becomes your new favorite afternoon destination because it offers both privacy and a view of the forest floor that makes you feel like you're conducting important surveillance work. By the end of your second week of exploration, your mental map includes 12 trees, 2 major vine highways, 1 questionable shortcut that involves a branch that might be dead, and several scenic overlooks where you can sit and contemplate the vastness of a world that keeps revealing new layers of complexity. You've also developed a basic understanding of territorial politics, which trees are claimed by other lemurs, which ones are neutral territory, and which ones might be worth negotiating for if you ever become important enough to participate in such discussions. Your mother notices your expanded range with the mixed pride and concern of someone watching a child learn to ride a bicycle in traffic. She's pleased that you're developing independence and confidence, but she's also aware that your judgment is still developing, and that the world contains hazards your optimism hasn't yet accounted for. Her solution is to follow you at a discreet distance during your expeditions, close enough to intervene if necessary, but far enough away that you can maintain the illusion of complete independence. The forest, you're learning, is organized like a complex 3-dimensional neighborhood, where every tree is someone's home, every branch is a potential highway, and every clear space between trees represents either an opportunity or an obstacle, depending on your jumping skills and your appetite for risk. It's a world with its own geography, its own politics, and its own unwritten rules that you're learning through a combination of observation, experimentation, and occasional embarrassing mistakes. Your 7th week of life introduces you to the concept of seasonal change, in a way that makes you question whether someone has been adjusting the thermostat without consulting you. The morning air carries a different quality of light, the leaves seem less enthusiastic about their jobs, and there's a general sense that the forest has been reading economic reports and isn't optimistic about the future. This is your first dry season, though you don't yet have the vocabulary to name what's happening around you. What you understand is that the world seems to be gradually running out of the things you've come to depend on, particularly water and the kind of lush, abundant fruit that has made eating feel like a recreational activity rather than work. The change begins subtly. Fruits that were previously available in quantities that seemed almost insulting in their abundance become harder to find. The reliable fruit trees still produce, but their offerings shrink from more than you could possibly eat to enough, if you're careful, to you should probably save some for later, in a progression that suggests the forest is implementing an austerity program that no one bothered to explain to you. Water, which has never been something you needed to think about, it fell from the sky, collected in tree hollows, and was generally available whenever you felt thirsty, becomes a more precious commodity. The shallow pools that formed in branch forks after every rain begin to disappear, leaving behind only damp spots that smell like promises the sky couldn't keep. The streams that you could hear but not see from your home territory grow quieter, their cheerful babbling reduced to what sounds like conversational whispers. Your first real understanding of scarcity comes when you arrive at breakfast tree, expecting your usual selection of ripe fruit, and find instead a collection of options that range from not quite ready to probably edible if you're not picky too. This might be food, but it might also be a learning experience you'd rather avoid. The tree seems to be rationing its resources, producing just enough fruit to keep its residents from moving away, but not enough to maintain the easy abundance you've learned to expect. This is personally offensive to you. For 7 weeks, the forest has operated like a well-run hotel, where meals appeared on schedule, and your only responsibility was to show up with an appetite. The idea that food might require effort, that you might need to travel farther, search more carefully, or make difficult choices between mediocre options strikes you as a fundamental breach of the contract you thought you had with the universe. Your response to this crisis is to expand your foraging territory, which leads to the discovery that scarcity is not a localized problem affecting only your personal fruit trees. Other lemurs are also ranging farther from their home territories, and the forest is becoming more crowded as everyone spreads out in search of resources that used to be conveniently close to home. Trees that were previously uncontested become sites of polite competition, with multiple families arriving at the same fruit source and having to work out sharing arrangements through a combination of negotiation and strategic patience. You witness your first serious territorial dispute during this period, between two adult males who have conflicting claims to a fig tree that's producing the only reliably sweet fruit within a half-mile radius. The disagreement unfolds like a very slow, very polite dance, where each participant tries to claim the best feeding spots while avoiding direct confrontation. They circle each other through the branches, making displays of size and confidence, each waiting for the other to concede the prime feeding locations. The resolution comes when one of the males realizes that the energy he's spending on territorial posturing could be better used for actual foraging, and he moves on to find a less contested but perhaps equally productive tree. It's your first lesson in the economics of conflict. Sometimes winning isn't worth the cost of fighting, especially when there are other options available for creatures smart enough to look for them. The dry season also introduces you to a completely different version of the creatures you've been sharing the forest with. Animals that seemed relaxed and unhurried during the abundant season become more focused, more purposeful, more aware of their surroundings. Birds that previously spent their mornings singing elaborate songs now devote more time to systematic foraging. The insects that provided background noise to your daily activities become less noticeable, not because they've disappeared, but because they're investing their energy more efficiently. Even the plants seem different. Leaves that were thick and glossy become slightly thinner, slightly less vibrant, as if they're conserving their resources for the challenging months ahead. Flowers become less common, not because the plants have lost interest in reproduction, but because they're being more strategic about when and where to invest in the expensive business of creating the next generation. You begin to understand that the forest operates on cycles that are much larger than your daily routine of eating, sleeping, and exploring. There are seasonal rhythms that affect every living thing, including you. And success in this environment requires adapting your behavior to match these larger patterns. The easy abundance of your first weeks was not the normal state of the world. It was just one phase in a cycle that includes periods of plenty and periods of scarcity. This realization is both humbling and exciting. Humbling because it makes clear that you're not the center of the forest's attention. You're just one small participant in a system that has been running according to its own rules for millions of years. Exciting because it suggests that learning these rules will make you more capable of thriving in an environment that's more complex and interesting than you initially understood. Your foraging behavior begins to change in response to the seasonal shift. Instead of eating fruit immediately when you find it, you start to evaluate whether it might be worth saving for later. Instead of focusing only on the sweetest, ripest options, you begin to consider foods that might be less appealing but more reliable. You develop a basic understanding of resource management. Though you wouldn't call it that, you just notice that planning ahead feels better than being hungry. The dry season also teaches you about patience in a more concrete way than your previous experiences, with waiting for branches to stop swaying or for other lemurs to finish using the good sunbathing spots. Now, patience becomes a survival skill. The ability to wait for better options instead of settling for whatever's immediately available, the wisdom to conserve energy for productive activities instead of wasting it on unnecessary movement. By your 9th week, you've developed what could generously be called a basic understanding of seasonal adaptation. You know that resources fluctuate, that planning ahead is valuable, and that the forest's abundance follows patterns that are predictable if you pay attention to the right signs. You've also learned that other creatures are dealing with the same challenges you are, which creates both competition and opportunities for cooperation. The morning mist still clings to the canopy, but now you notice how quickly it disappears, how little moisture it leaves behind, how the trees seem to hold on to every drop, as if they know something you're still learning. The light has a different quality, sharper and more direct, less filtered through the humid air that characterized your early weeks. Even the sounds of the forest have changed, less lush rustle of abundant vegetation, more focused scratching and searching as creatures work harder for their daily needs. Week 8 brings with it a peculiar form of self-awareness that might charitably be called the beginning of competence, and more accurately described as the ability to fail at things in increasingly sophisticated ways. Your body has finally begun to catch up with your ambitions, though the relationship between what you want to do and what you can actually accomplish remains more aspirational than reliable. Your jumping, which has been the source of considerable personal drama over the past few weeks, undergoes what could be called a revolution, or possibly just evolution with better timing. The breakthrough comes not through any particular practice session or moment of inspiration, but through the gradual accumulation of muscle memory that finally reaches a critical mass, where your body begins to remember what worked before and what led to unplanned contact with solid wood. You're moving between trees on a morning when you're more focused on the destination than the journey. There's a particularly promising cluster of fruit about 3 trees away, and you're approaching the travel portion of this expedition as a necessary but routine task, rather than an athletic challenge requiring all your concentration. This casual approach to what has previously been your most demanding skill proves to be exactly what was needed. Your first jump is clean and confident, landing exactly where you intended with enough precision that you don't need to scramble for better grip or reposition yourself once you arrive. The second jump flows naturally from the first, your body calculating distance and trajectory without requiring conscious input from your mind, which is still primarily focused on fruit logistics. By the third jump, you realize something significant has happened. Jumping has become transportation rather than adventure. This is both liberating and slightly disappointing. Liberating because you can now move through your territory without planning each transition like a military operation. Disappointing because you'd grown somewhat fond of the drama and uncertainty that accompanied every attempt to travel between trees. There was something exciting about never being entirely sure whether any given jump would end in success or in an educational experience involving unexpected tree anatomy. But competence, you discover, brings its own satisfactions. The ability to move efficiently through the canopy opens up new possibilities for exploration and foraging. Trees that were previously too far away for casual visits become part of your regular circuit. Routes that required careful planning and multiple rest stops become quick shortcuts. The forest becomes smaller and more navigable, less like an obstacle course and more like a neighborhood where you know all the streets. Your newfound jumping confidence leads to experimentation with more advanced techniques. You begin to incorporate small flourishes into your movements, a mid-air twist here, a slightly longer hang time there, not because these additions serve any practical purpose, but because competence creates space for style. You develop signature moves that serve no function except to express your personality through the medium of arboreal locomotion. The most significant development in your skill portfolio, however, is the discovery that you possess opposable thumbs. This revelation comes during a particularly challenging fruit extraction operation involving a fig that's wedged into a tight space between 2 branches. You've been approaching this problem with the straightforward technique of grabbing and pulling, which has been producing results that could charitably be called partial success. In a moment of frustration, you adjust your grip, wrapping your thumb around the fig in a way that suddenly provides much more control and leverage than your previous 4-fingered approach. The fig comes free easily, but more importantly, you realize that your thumb has been available for this kind of precision work all along, and you've been ignoring it like a tool you didn't know you owned. This discovery leads to 2 weeks of intensive thumb experimentation. You spend considerable time simply moving your thumbs independently of your other fingers, marveling at the precision and control this provides. You practice picking up small objects, manipulating twigs, and performing delicate operations that would have been impossible with your previous 4-finger approach to manual dexterity. The thumb revelation changes your relationship with your environment in subtle but significant ways. Fruits that were previously difficult to harvest become accessible. Small branches that were too thin to grip securely become usable. Your grooming technique improves dramatically, allowing you to participate in social activities with something approaching competence rather than enthusiastic chaos. You become somewhat obsessed with your own hands, spending long periods examining them from different angles and testing their capabilities in various situations. This fascination puzzles the other lemurs in your troop, who watch you staring at your own palms with the intensity of someone who's discovered fire. From their perspective, you've always had thumbs, and the fact that you're just now figuring out how to use them effectively is more a comment on your observational skills than a revolutionary breakthrough. But for you, the thumb discovery represents something larger than just improved manual dexterity. It's your first real experience with the idea that you might possess capabilities you haven't yet discovered, that your body might be more sophisticated and versatile than you've realized. If you can spend 8 weeks of life without noticing that your thumbs are opposable, what other features might you be overlooking? This leads to a period of comprehensive self-examination that probably looks to outside observers like an unusually narcissistic phase. You spend time testing the range of motion of various joints, experimenting with different ways of gripping branches, and generally conducting a thorough inventory of your physical capabilities. You discover that your tail is more versatile than you'd realized, that your toes are surprisingly dexterous, and that your sense of balance is actually quite good when you're not thinking about it too hard. The most surprising skill development during this period is your mastery of the art of looking busy while accomplishing absolutely nothing. This ability emerges naturally from your increased comfort in your environment. You no longer need to spend every moment focused on basic survival tasks, which creates time for more sophisticated activities like contemplation, observation, and strategic loafing. You perfect the technique of sitting in prominent locations while appearing to be engaged in important lemur business. To outside observers, you seem to be conducting surveillance of your territory, monitoring weather patterns, or engaged in deep thinking about complex lemur issues. In reality, you're often just enjoying the sensation of having nothing urgent to do while remaining alert enough to respond if something interesting happens. This skill proves valuable in social situations where your presence is expected, but your active participation isn't required. Adult lemurs engaged in serious discussions will tolerate your nearby presence, as long as you appear to be contributing through attentive observation rather than disruptive activity. You learn to position yourself where you can hear interesting conversations while maintaining the appearance of being focused on your own important business. By week 10, your skill development has reached a level that could be described as basically functional. You can move through your territory efficiently, extract food from moderately challenging locations, participate in social activities without causing major disruptions, and generally conduct the business of daily life without constant supervision or crisis management. This competence brings with it a new form of confidence, the kind that comes from knowing you can handle routine challenges without drama. But it also creates space for new types of problems, specifically the complex social and emotional challenges that come with becoming old enough to notice that some lemurs smell different than others, and that this difference seems to matter in ways you don't yet understand. Week 11 introduces you to one of the forest's most perplexing mysteries: the growing awareness that not all lemurs are exactly the same, and that these differences seem to matter in ways that no one has bothered to explain to you. It begins with scent, which has always been part of your sensory experience, but is now becoming more prominent and more interesting, like background music, that's slowly increasing in volume until you can't help but pay attention to it. You first notice the phenomenon during a routine social grooming session with your troop. You're participating in the morning ritual of mutual fur maintenance, working your way through the familiar routine of checking family members for debris and insects, when you encounter a scent that stops you mid-groom. It's coming from one of the young female lemurs, approximately your age, and it's unlike anything you've experienced before. The scent isn't unpleasant, quite the opposite. It's complex and layered, like a combination of flowers, rain, and something indefinable that makes you want to breathe more deeply and stay closer than the normal protocols of grooming require. You find yourself lingering in her vicinity longer than necessary, conducting more thorough grooming work than the condition of her fur actually requires, and generally behaving in ways that feel natural but don't seem to have clear practical purposes. The young female whose name in your mind becomes interesting scent lemur, for lack of more sophisticated terminology, seems to enjoy the extra attention, though she also gives you occasional looks that suggest she's noticed your behavior has become somewhat more focused than typical grooming situations warrant. Her responses are encouraging without being completely clear, like someone who's enjoying a conversation but isn't entirely sure what topic you're discussing. This new awareness creates a background level of interest that affects your daily routine in subtle but persistent ways. You find yourself taking routes through your territory that happen to pass near areas where interesting scent lemur spends time. Your foraging patterns begin to overlap with hers more frequently than statistical probability would suggest. When the troop gathers for social activities, you position yourself where you can observe her without being obvious about it, though your definition of not obvious might need some calibration. The situation reaches a crisis point during your second week of this new fascination, when you decide that the best way to demonstrate your worthiness as a potential companion is to showcase your jumping skills. This seems logical. Jumping is your most impressive physical ability, and physical prowess should logically be attractive to discerning female lemurs who appreciate competence and athleticism. You choose your moment carefully. Interesting scent lemur is foraging in a tree about 15 feet from your current position, well within range of your jumping capabilities, but far enough away to make the leap look impressive rather than routine. The tree she's in has good branches for landing, multiple backup options if your aim is slightly off, and offers an excellent platform for the kind of casual, confident arrival that should effectively communicate your status as a lemur who has mastered the challenging art of arboreal navigation. You position yourself for optimal takeoff, ensuring that your launching branch is stable and that your approach angle will create the most dramatic possible flight path. You take a moment to groom yourself quickly, making sure your fur is arranged to best advantage, and that you look like the kind of lemur who makes this sort of impressive journey routinely. You even practice your landing posture, aiming for a combination of athletic grace and casual confidence that should leave no doubt about your desirability as a companion. The jump begins perfectly. Your takeoff is clean and powerful, your form is excellent, and your trajectory is exactly what you calculated. For the first half of the flight, you are magnificent, a small furry missile following a perfect parabolic arc through the dappled forest light, the embodiment of lemur, athleticism and confidence. The second half of the jump follows a different script entirely. Your calculations, which seemed flawless during the planning phase, proved to have overlooked several important variables. The branch you're aiming for is slightly closer than it appeared, which means you're going to arrive with more speed and less precision than your landing strategy requires. The branch itself is also somewhat smaller in diameter than it looked from a distance, which reduces your margin for error to essentially zero. Instead of the controlled, graceful landing you envisioned, you deliver what could generously be called an aggressive arrival. You hit the target branch with enough force to make it bend dramatically, bouncing you back into the air in an unplanned second phase of flight that carries you past your intended destination and into the branches beyond. These secondary branches, which you hadn't included in your original flight plan, turn out to be less structurally sound than the main branch you were aiming for. Instead of catching you and providing a platform for recovery, they bend and break under your impact, creating a cascade of snapping twigs and falling leaves that accompanies your descent through the canopy, like nature's version of a percussion section having a nervous breakdown. You eventually come to rest in a large bush, about 10 feet below your intended landing site, thoroughly tangled in vines and decorated with leaves, twigs, and the kind of plant debris that suggests you've had an intimate encounter with vegetation that wasn't part of your original travel plans. The bush, to its credit, provides a soft landing, though it makes extracting yourself a process that requires several minutes of undignified struggling, and produces sounds that attract the attention of every creature within hearing distance. Interesting. Lemur watches this entire performance from her perch in the tree you were attempting to reach. Her expression progresses from initial interest, through concern, to what appears to be sympathetic amusement. When you finally emerge from the bush, looking like a lemur who's been assembled from spare parts by someone working from a blurry photograph, she gives you a look that clearly communicates, "That was certainly memorable, though perhaps not in the way you intended." The experience teaches you several important lessons about romance, physics, and the relationship between confidence and competence. First, impressive athletic displays are only impressive when they work, as planned failed demonstrations of skill tend to communicate the opposite message from what you intended. Second, the gap between can definitely make this jump and can make this jump while being observed by someone whose opinion matters is larger than you anticipated. Third, bushes, while excellent for preventing serious injury, are terrible for maintaining dignity. Your approach to romantic interaction undergoes significant revision following the bush incident. Instead of attempting spectacular demonstrations of physical prowess, you begin to focus on more sustainable forms of courtship, being present during social activities, sharing information about good foraging locations, and engaging in the kind of extended grooming sessions that seem to be appreciated without carrying significant risk of public humiliation. You discover that interesting scent lemur is actually quite approachable when you're not launching yourself through the air in her general direction. She responds positively to patient, attentive conversation, the lemur equivalent of small talk about weather, food quality, and local gossip about other troop members. She seems to appreciate your growing competence in routine lemur activities more than your attempts at spectacular lemur feats. Over the course of several weeks, you develop something that might generously be called a friendship, and hopefully will evolve into something more significant. You learn that romance, like jumping and foraging, is a skill that requires practice, and that benefits from starting with achievable goals, rather than ambitious demonstrations that exceed your current capabilities. The bush incident becomes part of your personal history, though it's not a story you volunteer to tell. When other young lemurs ask about your approach to courtship, you emphasize the importance of patience, consistency, and knowing your own limitations, advice that comes from direct experience with the consequences of ignoring these principles. Interesting scent lemur, for her part, seems to appreciate your evolution from lemur who might injure himself trying to impress me, to lemur who can be trusted to behave reasonably in social situations. your relationship develops along lines that are more sustainable than dramatic, which turns out to be exactly what both of you prefer. By week 14, you've achieved something approaching success in the romance department, not the spectacular, movie-worthy courtship you initially envisioned, but the kind of steady, reliable companionship that's built on mutual respect, shared interests, and the understanding that the best relationships are based on who you actually are, rather than who you think you should be when you're trying too hard to impress someone. The forest continues its ancient rhythms around your small personal dramas, indifferent to your romantic successes and failures, but providing the stage where these essential life lessons play out. The trees that witnessed your spectacular failure also observe your gradual success, though they maintain the same neutral stance they've held toward lemur romance for millions of years. In the canopy above, your mother watches your romantic adventures with the complex mixture of amusement and concern that comes with observing someone you care about learn important life lessons through direct experience. She remembers her own early attempts at courtship, her own spectacular failures and gradual successes, and she knows that some knowledge can only be gained through personal trial and error. The afternoon light filters through leaves that are beginning to show the subtle changes of advancing season, creating patterns of light and shadow that shift with each breeze. You sit on a branch next to interesting scent lemur, sharing a particularly good piece of fruit and engaging in the kind of companionable silence that's comfortable rather than awkward. These are the moments that mark the transition from adolescence towards something approaching adulthood. Not grand gestures or dramatic achievements, but the quiet satisfactions of learning to navigate the complex social world of lemur society without causing major disasters or embarrassing yourself beyond recovery. You're still young, still learning, still occasionally making mistakes that provide entertainment for other troop members, but you're also developing the skills and relationships that will form the foundation of your adult life. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, territory to explore, food to find, social situations to navigate. But today, sitting in the comfortable presence of someone whose scent has become as familiar and reassuring as your own family, you're content to be exactly where you are. A young lemur, learning to balance independence with companionship, ambition with realism, and confidence with the kind of humility that comes from personal experience with bushes. You're 4 months old now, which in the complex mathematics of lemur development translates to old enough to think you know what you're doing, and young enough to be spectacularly wrong about most of it, but with enough physical competence to make your mistakes more interesting. Your body has settled into proportions that suggest you might actually be a lemur rather than a small furry experiment in controlled chaos, though your decision-making process still operates on principles that would puzzle a philosophy professor. The morning mist rises from the forest floor like the ghost of yesterday's humidity, and you find yourself perched on the edge of what has been your world for the past 16 weeks, looking out at the vast green expanse of Madagascar that stretches beyond your family's territory, like an ocean of possibilities and probably regrets. There's something stirring in your chest that feels like hunger, but isn't satisfied by food, like thirst, but not for water, a restlessness that makes the familiar branches feel suddenly confining. The realization comes gradually, like dawn breaking over a landscape you've been navigating in darkness without realizing it. Your family territory, which once seemed vast enough to contain all possible adventures, now feels more like a well-appointed waiting room where you've been preparing for something larger and more complex. The 3 trees that form the foundation of your geographic understanding, home tree, breakfast tree, and afternoon nap tree, have become as familiar as your own fur, which is to say they're comfortable and functional but no longer particularly exciting. You've mapped every branch, memorized every foraging opportunity, and participated in every social ritual until the patterns feel as predictable as the sunrise. Your morning routine has become a series of checkboxes. Wake up, groom, eat, socialize, explore familiar territory, eat again, socialize some more, find a comfortable spot for afternoon contemplation, eat dinner, engage in evening family activities, sleep. It's a perfectly reasonable life for a lemur who's content with perfectly reasonable lemur existence. But contentment, you're discovering, isn't the same thing as satisfaction. There's a difference between being comfortable and being challenged, between being safe and being fully alive. The territory you know so well has taught you everything it can teach, and continuing to live there feels less like home, and more like postponing the real business of figuring out who you are, when you're not defined by your family's expectations and protection. The decision to leave doesn't arrive as a dramatic moment of clarity. It emerges slowly, like water seeping through soil, until it finally breaks through to the surface. You begin spending more time at the edges of your family's territory, looking out at the unknown forest beyond with something that might be longing or might just be curiosity taken to its logical extreme. You find yourself calculating distances to trees you've never visited, wondering what kinds of fruit grow in valleys you've never explored, imagining what it would be like to wake up in a place where you don't already know what the day will bring. Your mother notices your increasing preoccupation with the boundaries of familiar territory. She watches you spending long periods perched at the outermost branches of your range, staring into the distance with the expression of someone planning a journey they haven't yet announced. Her response is complex, part pride that you're developing the independence necessary for adult lemur life, part anxiety about the dangers you'll face in unfamiliar territory, and part something that might be relief at the prospect of having fewer individuals to worry about in her daily territorial management. The conversation, when it finally happens, doesn't involve words in any language humans would recognize. Instead, it's conducted through the subtle language of positioning, gesture, and shared understanding that develops between family members who've spent months in close proximity. You communicate your intention through increasingly bold forays toward the territory boundaries, longer absences from family activities, and a general restlessness that makes it clear you're preparing for something significant. Your mother's response is to gradually reduce her supervision of your daily activities, giving you space to practice independence while still providing backup if you encounter situations beyond your current capabilities. It's her way of conducting a trial separation, allowing both of you to adjust to the idea of reduced daily contact before making the transition final. The actual departure happens on a morning that seems no different from any other morning, except for the quality of light that makes everything look slightly more significant than usual. You wake up, conduct your usual grooming routine, and participate in the family's morning social rituals. But instead of settling into the familiar patterns of territorial life, you find yourself climbing to the highest accessible branch and looking out at the forest with the kind of attention you usually reserve for potential dangers or particularly interesting food. The direction you choose is largely arbitrary southwest, toward a section of forest that you've observed from a distance but never explored. There's no particular reason to prefer southwest over northeast or any other direction. You're simply selecting an option from the available possibilities and committing to it with the kind of confidence that comes from not fully understanding what you're committing to. Your mother watches your departure with an expression that contains multiple layers of meaning. There's sadness at the disruption of family routines that have provided structure and comfort for months. There's worry about the challenges you'll face navigating unfamiliar territory without backup. There's pride in your growth toward independence and self-sufficiency. And underneath it all, there's something that looks suspiciously like relief, the expression of someone who's been sharing their living space with an increasingly restless teenager and is finally getting their garage back. The last look you exchange contains an entire conversation about love, independence, worry, confidence, and the complex mixture of emotions that accompanies any significant transition. Then you turn southwest and begin the most significant journey of your life so far, armed with 4 months of experience, a basic understanding of lemur survival skills, and the kind of optimism that comes from not yet knowing how much you don't know. The first hour of independent travel is exhilarating. You're moving through territory you've never seen before, making decisions about route and pace without consulting anyone else, experiencing the particular satisfaction that comes from being entirely responsible for your own choices. The forest reveals itself as larger and more varied than your family territory suggested. There are trees you've never seen before, plants you don't recognize, and an overall sense of complexity that makes you feel like you're finally engaging with the real Madagascar rather than just the simplified version you've been practicing on. By the second hour, the exhilaration begins to mix with something that might be concern, or might just be the natural result of realizing that you're now operating without a safety net. The trees you're traveling through don't have the comfortable familiarity of home. Territory branches that look sturdy might not be. Distances that seem reasonable might be optimistic. And the overall layout of routes and resources doesn't follow the patterns you've learned to navigate automatically. Your navigation skills, which seemed adequate when you were operating within familiar territory, proved to be roughly equivalent to those of a drunk tourist armed with a map drawn by someone who's never been to the place they're mapping. You have a general sense of direction and a basic understanding of how to move through forest canopy, but you lack the detailed knowledge of local geography that makes travel efficient rather than experimental. By the end of your first day of independent travel, you've covered approximately 2 miles of distance and gained a comprehensive education in the difference between knowing how to travel and knowing where you're traveling to. You're thoroughly lost, moderately tired, and beginning to understand that independence isn't just about the freedom to make your own choices, it's also about being responsible for the consequences of those choices, even when the consequences include sleeping in an unfamiliar tree, surrounded by unknown sounds, and the growing awareness that you might have been more prepared for family life than you realized. Your first evening alone in unfamiliar territory introduces you to a completely different version of existence than anything your family life prepared you for. The sounds of the forest, which you've been hearing every night for 4 months, suddenly become much more interesting when you're responsible for interpreting them without help. Every rustle could be wind moving through leaves, or it could be something large and hungry moving through the underbrush, with you specifically in mind as an evening snack. Finding food without your family's accumulated knowledge proves to be an educational experience that makes you appreciate the invisible infrastructure of shared information that supported your previous lifestyle. When you lived with your family, someone always knew where the reliable fruit trees were located, which plants were safe to eat, and when seasonal resources would become available. Your foraging was essentially grocery shopping in a store where someone else had already done the research and quality control. Now you're conducting primary research on the edibility of various plant species, armed with 4 months of experience and the kind of confidence that comes from never having been seriously wrong about anything important. Your first independent meal consists of fruits that range from definitely safe because I recognize this species, to probably safe because it smells familiar, to worth trying because I'm hungry, and it looks approximately like food. The results of this experimental approach to nutrition provide immediate feedback on the accuracy of your food identification skills. The fruits you definitely recognize taste exactly as expected. The fruits that probably are safe turn out to be safe but disappointingly bland, like someone trying to make fruit-flavored cardboard more appealing through the addition of actual fruit flavoring. The fruits you try because you're hungry and optimistic turn out to be an educational experience in the precise relationship between hunger and good judgment. You spend your first independent evening dealing with digestive consequences that make you understand why your family's food choices seemed conservative and boring. Conservative and boring, you realize, are excellent qualities in food, when the alternative is spending several hours questioning your life choices, while your stomach conducts what feels like a small-scale rebellion against your decision-making process. The night itself presents challenges that you didn't anticipate during the planning phases of your departure. Sleeping in an unfamiliar tree means guessing about the structural integrity of branches, the security of your sleeping position, and the likelihood that other creatures might have prior claims to your chosen location. Every sound that would have been background noise in your family territory becomes a potential warning that requires analysis and appropriate response. The forest at night is full of creatures you've been sharing your environment with but haven't previously met, mostly because they conduct their business during hours when sensible lemurs are asleep. Now that you're spending your first night as a guest in their territory, you're getting introduced to the neighborhood's night shift, an assortment of animals who make sounds ranging from probably harmless to definitely something I should know more about, to that might be directed specifically at me, and I should probably have an opinion about whether this is a good thing. Your sleeping strategy evolves throughout the night from find a comfortable position and relax to find the most secure position possible and remain alert for developments. You discover that being alone in unfamiliar territory makes every sound more significant, every shadow more suspicious, and every hour between sunset and sunrise significantly longer than the same hours had been when you were sleeping in the safety of your family group. The breakthrough in your solo survival education comes during your second week of independent living, when you finally locate a reliable food source that doesn't require gambling with your digestive system. It's a fig tree that's producing more fruit than the local wildlife can consume, located in a valley about half a mile from your temporary sleeping tree. The figs are perfectly ripe, abundant, and clearly safe, because you observe several other lemur species eating them without apparent adverse effects. This discovery teaches you the importance of systematic exploration rather than random foraging. Instead of eating whatever you encounter during your travels, you begin to scout your territory thoroughly, mapping the locations of different food sources and observing which ones are being used by other animals. This approach to resource management feels more like planning and less like gambling, which represents a significant improvement in your overall confidence level. Your sleeping situation improves as you develop better criteria for selecting overnight accommodations. Instead of choosing trees based primarily on convenience and general appearance, you begin to evaluate potential sleeping sites based on structural soundness, security from ground-based threats, and proximity to escape routes. You develop a checklist of desirable features: branches large enough to support your weight comfortably, dense enough foliage to provide some concealment, and positioning that allows you to monitor your surroundings without being easily spotted by passing predators. The third week brings your first serious test of independent survival skills when you encounter a fossa, Madagascar's primary predator, and the creature that your family's bedtime stories have been warning you about since you were old enough to understand the concept of things that eat lemurs. The meeting happens during your afternoon foraging, when you're focused on extracting fruit from a particularly productive tree and not paying sufficient attention to your surroundings. The fossa is approximately 3 times your size, moves with the fluid confidence of something that has never been prey, and regards you with the kind of professional interest that a chef might show toward a promising ingredient. The situation develops slowly enough that you have time to appreciate the full complexity of your circumstances. You're alone, in unfamiliar territory, without backup, facing the only creature in Madagascar that considers lemurs a regular menu item. Your response combines the survival skills you've been developing with pure instinct in a way that surprises you with its effectiveness. Instead of panicking or freezing, you implement an immediate strategic retreat that involves abandoning your current food-gathering activities and moving to higher, thinner branches that can support your weight but probably can't support the fossas. Your climbing becomes more urgent and more precise than it's ever been, motivated by circumstances that make the difference between good enough and excellent climbing technique a matter of considerable personal importance. The fossa watches your retreat with what appears to be mild disappointment rather than serious pursuit. After a few minutes of evaluation, it decides that the energy required to hunt you would exceed the caloric value of the meal you'd provide, and it moves on to look for more accessible prey. You remain in the high branches for another hour, reviewing the encounter and adjusting your understanding of solo survival priorities. The experience teaches you that independent living requires a different level of situational awareness than family living. When you're part of a group, there are always other individuals watching for dangers while you focus on specific tasks. When you're alone, you're responsible for all surveillance and threat assessment while simultaneously conducting your daily business. This means developing the ability to forage efficiently while remaining alert to your surroundings, to sleep securely while staying responsive to potential dangers, and to explore new territory while maintaining awareness of escape routes and defensive options. By the end of your first month of solo living, you've achieved what could be called basic competence in independent survival. You can find food reliably, sleep securely in unfamiliar locations, and avoid the most obvious dangers through a combination of caution and improving judgment. You're not yet thriving, but you're definitely surviving, which represents significant progress from your initial experimental approach to solo lemur life. Week 6 of your independent existence brings with it the realization that wandering randomly through the forest, while educational, isn't a sustainable long-term lifestyle. You need what other adult lemurs have: a territory you can call your own, a familiar area where you know the resources, understand the geography, and have some reasonable claim to the fruits of your labor. The challenge is finding a section of forest that's suitable for lemur habitation, but doesn't already belong to someone else who has stronger claims and better territorial defense skills than you currently possess. Your search for suitable real estate begins with a systematic survey of the area within a reasonable distance of your current wandering range. You're looking for what could be called the lemur equivalent of a starter home. Not necessarily the prime real estate in the forest, but a location that meets your basic needs and doesn't require you to displace established residents who might take exception to your presence. The criteria for good lemur territory turn out to be more complex than you initially understood. You need reliable food sources, adequate shelter options, reasonable security from predators, and water access within a manageable distance. But you also need these resources to be available without bringing you into direct conflict with other lemurs who have prior claims and significantly more experience in territorial disputes than your current 0 experience level. Your first serious candidate is a cluster of 3 trees located in what appears to be a territorial gap between 2 established lemur families. The trees are mature, structurally sound, and positioned in a way that provides good visibility of the surrounding area. One of them produces a modest but reliable supply of edible fruit, another offers excellent shelter during rain, and the third provides optimal positioning for morning sun exposure. The problem becomes apparent during your second day of detailed evaluation. The territory isn't unclaimed, it's just temporarily unoccupied. The resident family is conducting what appears to be an extended foraging expedition in a different part of their range, and they return while you're in the middle of what you thought was a promising real estate inspection. The confrontation develops slowly and politely, but with an undercurrent of seriousness that makes it clear this is not a casual social encounter. The family consists of 2 adults and 1 juvenile, all of whom are larger than you, and all of whom regard your presence in their territory with the kind of attention that suggests they're waiting for you to explain yourself. The adult male positions himself between you and the rest of his family, while maintaining a posture that's alert but not immediately threatening. Your response to this situation draws on everything you've learned about lemur social dynamics, which is fortunately enough to keep you from making any major diplomatic errors. You immediately signal non-aggressive intent through body language, move away from the central areas of their territory, and begin a strategic withdrawal that acknowledges their prior claims while maintaining your own dignity. The departure is conducted with what you hope is graceful acceptance of the territorial realities, though it also represents a significant setback in your real estate search. You're back to wandering and surveying, looking for the lemur equivalent of land that's available because no one else wants it, which usually means there are good reasons why no one else wants it. Your second territorial prospect is located in an area that initially seems perfect. Abundant fruit trees, excellent shelter options, good security positioning, and no obvious signs of current occupation. You spend 3 days conducting thorough evaluation of the resources and geography, mapping escape routes and defensive positions, and generally conducting the kind of detailed analysis that should precede any major residential decision. The reason for the territory's availability becomes clear during your first rainstorm, when you discover that the entire area becomes a temporary swamp. What had appeared to be well-drained forest floor turns out to be a shallow basin that collects water during any significant precipitation, creating conditions that are more suitable for aquatic animals than arboreal lemurs. Your careful survey of trees and branches becomes irrelevant when the forest floor disappears under 6 inches of muddy water that takes several days to drain. This experience teaches you the importance of seasonal evaluation in territorial selection. Resources that look adequate during dry weather might become inaccessible during wet weather, and vice versa. Good lemur territory needs to be viable year-round, not just during the specific weather conditions that happen to exist during your initial survey. Your third attempt at territorial establishment takes you farther from your original wandering range, into an area that's less convenient, but also less likely to be claimed by established families. The territory you finally select isn't the prime real estate you initially hoped for, but it meets your basic requirements, and has the significant advantage of being available for immediate occupancy. The domain you claim consists of 2 medium-sized trees and 1 large bush, connected by a network of vines and smaller branches that provide reasonable mobility within your territorial boundaries. It's not an impressive empire, but it's defensible, sustainable, and provides everything necessary for basic lemur life without requiring you to fight other lemurs for the privilege of living there. Marking your territory introduces you to one of the more basic and intimate aspects of adult lemur life. Territorial claims are established through scent marking, which involves depositing chemical signals that communicate information about your identity, your territorial boundaries, and your general fitness as a territorial occupant. It's nature's way of writing property deeds, except that the documents are written in a language that humans would find deeply unpleasant, and the filing system involves a lot of strategic urination on significant trees. The process of establishing territorial markers requires you to visit every important tree, branch, and landmark within your claimed area, and leave appropriate chemical signatures that will inform other lemurs about your presence and your claims. This is more complex than simply marking everything you encounter. You need to place markers strategically, refresh them regularly, and ensure that your chemical communications are clear and unambiguous. Your first territorial dispute arises during your second week of residence, when a young male lemur, approximately your age, decides to test your commitment to your territorial claims. He begins by making brief incursions into your territory, eating fruit from your trees, and generally behaving as if your territorial markers are suggestions rather than legal documents. The conflict escalates gradually, following what appears to be a standard protocol for territorial disputes between lemurs of roughly equal size and experience. It begins with increased territorial marking, both of you refreshing your chemical signatures more frequently and more prominently. Then it progresses to strategic positioning, where you spend time in highly visible locations within your territory, while he does the same in his territory, each of you demonstrating continuous occupation and alertness. The resolution comes through what could be called a war of attrition. You both invest considerable time and energy in territorial defense activities, but you have the advantage of actually living in the disputed territory while he's commuting from his own territory to conduct his harassment campaign. After 10 days of intensive marking, positioning, and strategic staring, he apparently decides that the energy cost of the dispute exceeds the potential benefits of adding your territory to his holdings. The successful defense of your territorial claims provides a level of satisfaction that surprises you with its intensity. This small collection of trees and branches represents something more significant than just a place to live. It's proof that you can identify resources, claim territory, and defend your claims against challenges from other lemurs. It's your first real achievement as an independent adult, and it feels considerably more meaningful than any of your previous accomplishments in jumping, foraging, or social interaction. Your three-tree empire gradually becomes familiar in the way that only comes from daily residence and continuous attention to detail. You learn which branches catch the morning sun, which locations provide the best views of approaching weather, and which routes through your territory offer the most efficient access to resources. The territory becomes mapped in your memory with the kind of precision that comes from understanding not just where things are, but how they relate to your daily needs and seasonal routines. Your 7th week of independent living introduces you to Madagascar's weather in a way that makes you understand why experienced lemurs always seem to be keeping one eye on the sky. Living with your family had provided some protection from weather extremes, more bodies to share warmth during cold spells, collective knowledge about the best shelter locations, and the accumulated wisdom of lemurs who had survived multiple seasonal cycles. Now you're conducting your own primary research on the relationship between weather and survival, armed with your own experience and whatever preparation you can manage in advance of meteorological events. Your first serious weather challenge begins as a subtle change in the morning air that suggests something different is developing beyond the horizon. The humidity increases in a way that makes breathing feel like work. The wind shifts to blow from directions you haven't experienced before, and there's a quality to the light that makes everything look slightly more dramatic than usual. The other animals in your territory begin behaving differently. Birds that normally spend their mornings singing. Elaborate songs become quiet and focused. Insects disappear entirely, and even the trees seem to be preparing for something significant. You don't recognize these signs as warnings, because your weather education has been limited to the kinds of routine, rain, and wind that occur within the safe boundaries of family territory. What's approaching is your first cyclone, though you won't learn that terminology until after you've gained practical experience with what it means when the sky decides to throw a tantrum and you're invited to participate whether you want to or not. The storm announces itself with a progression of increasingly urgent meteorological suggestions that it might be wise to find secure shelter and remain there until further notice. The wind begins as stronger than usual breezes that make the branches sway more than normal, then progresses to gusts that require you to adjust your grip and pay attention to balance. By the time you realize this isn't routine weather, the wind has become strong enough to make traveling between trees a complex exercise in timing and risk assessment. Your shelter selection during routine rainstorms has been based primarily on convenience and comfort, finding a location with sufficient leaf cover to stay dry while remaining accessible to food sources and territorial patrol routes. Cyclone shelter requires completely different criteria. Structural integrity becomes more important than convenience, security becomes more critical than comfort, and accessibility to other areas becomes less relevant than simply surviving until the weather improves. The tree you choose for cyclone shelter is the largest in your territory, with a trunk diameter that suggests it has survived multiple severe weather events and a branch structure that provides multiple options for secure positioning. You select a location about halfway up the tree, high enough to avoid potential flooding but low enough that the branches are thick enough to provide solid support during high winds. The storm arrives in waves, each one more intense than the last, building toward a crescendo that makes you understand why cyclones have names and reputations. The wind becomes strong enough to bend trees in ways that seem anatomically impossible, creating sounds that range from the groaning of wood under stress to the screaming of air moving through leaves at velocities that were never part of the original design specifications for forest canopies. Rain arrives not as drops but as sheets of water that seem to be falling sideways, driven by wind that treats normal concepts like up and down as purely advisory. Your shelter location, which seemed adequately protected during your selection process, proves to provide protection that could generously be described as partial. Within the first hour of serious weather, you're thoroughly soaked and discovering that being wet during a cyclone is significantly different from being wet during normal rain. The experience of riding out a cyclone while clinging to a tree branch teaches you several important lessons about weather, planning, and the relationship between confidence and competence. First, Weather events in Madagascar can exceed anything your previous experience prepared you for, and what seems like adequate preparation might turn out to be optimistic rather than realistic. Second, surviving severe weather is less about staying comfortable and more about staying attached to something stable until the conditions improve. Third, cyclones last much longer than you expect when you're experiencing them from the inside. The storm continues for what feels like several days, but is probably closer to 12 hours, during which you develop a much more intimate relationship with your shelter tree than you had previously considered necessary. You learn exactly which positions provide the most secure grip, which branches offer the best protection from wind-driven rain, and how to shift your weight to maintain balance when the entire tree is swaying in ways that seem more appropriate for a boat than a plant. When the cyclone finally passes, leaving behind a forest that looks like it's been redesigned by someone with different ideas about how trees should be arranged, you emerge from your shelter with a comprehensive education in severe weather, survival, and a new appreciation for routine lemur concerns like food availability and territorial disputes. Compared to surviving a cyclone, worrying about whether fruit trees are producing adequate supplies seems like a luxury problem. The post-cyclone landscape requires significant adjustments to your territorial management and daily routines. Several of the trees in your area have been damaged, changing the geography of routes between different locations. Some of your food sources have been disrupted, either damaged directly or made inaccessible by fallen branches and debris. Your territorial markers have been washed away, requiring you to re-establish your property claims through a complete remarking campaign. The cyclone also introduces you to mud as a significant factor in lemur life. The combination of intense rain and strong winds has turned much of the forest floor into a substance that's somewhere between soil and liquid, creating conditions that are challenging for creatures who prefer to conduct their lives in trees rather than swamps. When you do need to travel at ground level, you discover that mud has opinions about your movement plans, and those opinions generally involve you moving more slowly and with less dignity than you prefer. Your relationship with mud becomes increasingly intimate over the weeks following the cyclone, as the forest floor takes considerable time to return to its previous state of being primarily solid rather than primarily liquid. You develop techniques for mud navigation that involve careful route selection, strategic use of fallen branches as stepping stones, and acceptance that some degree of mud coating is going to be part of your daily appearance until the ground finally dries out. The wet season that follows the cyclone provides ongoing education in the difference between being damp and being thoroughly soaked for extended periods. Rain that seemed manageable during the dry season becomes a much more significant challenge when it continues for days rather than hours, when it's accompanied by winds that make shelter less effective, and when it occurs in an environment that's already saturated from previous weather events. You learn to recognize the subtle signs that indicate when rain is likely to be brief and manageable, versus when it's going to be the kind of sustained precipitation that requires serious shelter strategies and possibly rationing of activities that require leaving protected areas. Weather prediction becomes a survival skill, based on observation of wind patterns, cloud formations, and the behavior of other animals who have more experience with seasonal patterns than you do. Your sleeping arrangements undergo significant revision during the wet season, as you discover that staying dry while sleeping requires more sophisticated shelter construction than simply finding a tree with adequate leaf cover. You begin to build what could generously be called nests, and more accurately described as strategic arrangements of branches and leaves that provide multiple layers of protection from rain coming from various directions. The construction of adequate wet season shelter turns out to be more complex than your initial engineering efforts anticipated. Rain doesn't just fall straight down, it bounces off branches, runs along vines, and finds ways to penetrate shelter that seemed perfectly adequate during dry weather testing. Your shelter designs evolve through multiple iterations, each one addressing problems discovered during the previous version's field testing under actual weather conditions. Week 10 of your independent existence introduces you to the complex relationship between wanting to eat insects and actually catching insects, which turns out to involve significantly more skill and patience than your previous observations of other lemurs suggested. During your family life, protein supplementation happened somewhat automatically. Other family members with more experience and better technique would catch insects and share them, or you would occasionally stumble across insects that were slow enough or distracted enough to be catchable through enthusiasm rather than skill. Now that you're responsible for your own protein procurement, you're discovering that most insects have evolved specifically to avoid being eaten by lemurs, and they're quite good at their jobs. Your first serious hunting attempts are educational in the way that teaches you the precise difference between wanting something and being capable of obtaining it through your own efforts. Your hunting technique begins as what could charitably be called aggressive optimism. You observe an insect, calculate what seems like an appropriate capture strategy, and execute that strategy with confidence that borders on delusion. The insects, for their part, seem to regard your hunting efforts as a form of entertainment, allowing you to get close enough to think you might be successful before demonstrating their superior understanding of concepts like timing, acceleration, and three-dimensional movement. Your first month of serious hunting yields results that could generously be described as educational and more accurately called humbling. You successfully catch approximately 1 insect for every 50 attempts, and most of those successes occur when the insects are either distracted by other activities or suffering from judgment, impairment, that makes them vulnerable to capture by novice predators. The insects you do manage to catch tend to be the ones that other lemurs with more discerning standards might pass over the slow ones. The old ones, the ones that seem to have given up on life, and the occasional lucky grab when an insect makes a navigational error that puts it within range of your still developing coordination skills. Your diet expands to include protein sources that are more notable for their availability than their quality. Your hunting education progresses through several distinct phases, each representing improvements in technique and understanding that gradually move you from accidental success towards something approaching purposeful competence. The first breakthrough comes when you realize that successful hunting requires patience and observation rather than just enthusiasm and quick reflexes. You begin studying your prey before attempting capture, watching how different insects move, learning their patterns and preferences, understanding which ones are likely to be catchable and which ones are likely to provide educational experiences in the physics of failure. This research phase of hunting feels less exciting than the action phase, but it proves to be much more productive in terms of actual food acquisition. The second major development in your hunting skills involves learning to use tools. Though you don't initially recognize what you're doing as tool use, you discover that certain sticks can be used to probe cracks in bark where insects hide, that leaves can be used to corral insects into more favorable positions for capture, and that strategic use of your environment can compensate for limitations in your speed and coordination. Your tool use evolves from accidental discovery to intentional technique over several weeks of experimentation and refinement. You begin to select tools based on specific hunting situations, modifying sticks to appropriate lengths and shapes, choosing leaves based on size and flexibility, and generally developing what could be called a toolkit for insect capture that demonstrates planning and forethought rather than just opportunistic grabbing. The breakthrough in your hunting competence comes during your 12th week of independent living, when you successfully capture an insect on your first attempt. Not a slow insect, not a distracted insect, not an insect that seemed to be suffering from poor judgment. A perfectly normal, healthy insect that you identified, stalked, and captured through planning and execution rather than luck and persistence. The moment of success is both satisfying and anticlimactic. Satisfying because it represents the culmination of weeks of practice and skill development, proof that you can successfully compete with other forest predators for limited protein resources. Anticlimactic because the actual capture happens so quickly and smoothly that you almost miss the significance of what you've accomplished. You spend the rest of that afternoon feeling like what you imagine. A wilderness god must feel like competent, successful, and capable of obtaining food through your own skills, rather than through luck or the generosity of family members. The feeling is probably disproportionate to the actual significance of catching 1 insect, but it represents something larger than just successful hunting. It's proof that you can learn complex skills through practice and persistence, that you can compete successfully in an environment that doesn't provide instruction manuals or second chances. Your hunting success rate improves steadily after this breakthrough, not because you suddenly become much more skilled, but because you've learned to focus your efforts on hunting situations where your current skill level gives you reasonable chances of success. Instead of attempting to catch every insect you encounter, you begin to evaluate hunting opportunities based on realistic assessment of your capabilities and the difficulty of specific capture scenarios. You develop what could be called hunting wisdom, the ability to distinguish between insects that are worth pursuing and insects that will provide educational experiences in failure. This wisdom comes from accumulated experience with both successful and unsuccessful hunting attempts, and it represents the kind of judgment that separates competent hunters from enthusiastic beginners who haven't yet learned to calibrate their ambitions to their abilities. Your hunting technique evolves from flailing with hope to flailing with intent, to something that might eventually be recognized as systematic predation. You learn to approach hunting as a series of connected steps: observation, planning, positioning, execution, and follow-through, rather than as a single burst of optimistic activity that either works or doesn't. The insects in your territory begin to adjust their behavior in response to your improving hunting skills, which creates an ongoing evolutionary pressure that keeps your hunting challenges interesting. As you become better at catching the slow and unwary insects, the remaining population consists increasingly of individuals who are faster, more alert, and generally more difficult to catch. This means that your hunting skills must continue to improve just to maintain your current success rate. By week 14, your hunting has reached a level that could be called functionally adequate. You're not the most skilled predator in the forest, but you can reliably supplement your plant-based diet with enough protein to support healthy growth and development. Your technique continues to improve through daily practice, and you've developed the kind of patience and persistence that allows you to invest appropriate amounts of effort in hunting activities without becoming frustrated by the inevitable failures that are part of learning any complex skill. The forest around you continues its ancient cycles, indifferent to your small personal victories in hunting competence, but providing the stage where these essential survival skills are developed and refined. Other lemurs in the area have begun to recognize you as a legitimate territorial resident rather than a temporary visitor, which represents a form of social success that complements your technical achievements in hunting and territory management. Your daily routine has evolved. You're 18 months old now, which in the sophisticated mathematics of lemur development translates to old enough to have survived your own stupidity and young enough to still occasionally surprise yourself with it. Your body has settled into the proportions that will carry you through your prime years, lean but sturdy, proportioned for efficiency rather than drama, and marked by the small scars and calluses that serve as a resume of your adventures in independent living. The morning light filters through your territory with the familiar warmth of a routine you've earned through months of territorial management and daily refinement. You're perched on what has become known as your thinking branch, in the largest of your 5 trees, conducting the kind of systematic survey of your domain that has become as natural as breathing. This is your morning ritual. Check the weather, assess the condition of food sources, monitor for territorial encroachments, and generally conduct the business of being a successful adult lemur with property and responsibilities. Your territory has evolved from the modest 3-tree starter package you originally claimed into what could be described as a respectable suburban lemur estate. 5 mature trees now fall within your territorial boundaries, connected by a sophisticated network of vines and branch highways that you've maintained and improved over multiple seasons. The crown jewel of your property is a large bush that catches the morning sun at exactly the right angle for optimal temperature regulation. During the cooler months, a feature that other lemurs have begun to regard with what looks suspiciously like real estate envy. The expansion of your territory didn't happen through dramatic conquest or aggressive acquisition. Instead, it occurred through the kind of gradual, strategic growth that suggests you've developed what could be called business acumen, if lemurs conducted business in the traditional sense. You identified adjacent areas that were underutilized or temporarily abandoned, established your presence gradually through systematic marking and routine patrols, and consolidated your claims through the kind of persistent occupation that makes territorial challenges seem more trouble than they're worth. Your reputation in the lemur community has evolved from a clumsy, uncertain juvenile to a respected adult with reliable competence. No longer the one who fell during courtship, you're now known as someone who doesn't fall out of trees as much, a light-hearted but meaningful sign of progress. Your jumping, foraging, and territorial skills have matured from trial and error into systematic strategies backed by experience. Other lemurs treat you as a legitimate territorial neighbor. You're now part of resource negotiations, not because you demand to be, but because your opinions carry weight. Your daily life is efficient, shaped by 18 months of refinement. You've become the lemur equivalent of a competent middle manager, respected, dependable, and stable. Romantic pursuits have grown less humiliating and more strategic. Your second breeding season brings courtship based on compatibility, not desperation. Your mate, a capable neighbor to the north, appreciates your territorial management, social stability, and reliable food access. The relationship deepens into mutual trust and cooperation. Parenthood arrives with twins and no instruction manual. You and your mate adapt together, balancing foraging, teaching, and protection. Your offspring are both adorable and exhausting, innovating new ways to fail at basic lemur tasks. One falls out of trees, the other has a gift for eating the inedible. You teach them survival through demonstration and patient guidance, often marveling at how complex and rewarding parenting really is. Territorial disputes emerge as your status grows. A major conflict with your eastern neighbors over a prized fig tree unfolds through marking, posturing, and patience rather than aggression. You win the dispute not by fighting, but by outlasting your rival's commitment. Your reputation grows as someone firm but reasonable, a lemur who defends what matters and negotiates when appropriate. Over 4 years, you develop weather-predicting skills and long-term food storage strategies. You've moved from reactive survival to proactive planning. Your agricultural management includes tree maintenance, food caching, and seasonal harvesting schedules. You've mastered cyclone preparedness, shelter planning, and resource optimization. Your territory functions as a well-run system. Each tree, shelter, and storage site plays a role in keeping your family safe and well-fed. Younger lemurs observe you now, learning from the wisdom you once had to earn through hard-won mistakes. The once overwhelming complexity of the forest has become a familiar landscape. Sitting on your thinking branch, watching the morning light filter through your 5-tree domain, you reflect on what you've built. It's not flashy, but it's real, a quiet mastery of life's challenges, achieved through persistence, planning, and care. You are, at last, a successful adult lemur, respected, prepared, and living exactly the life you worked so long to build. You're 7 years old now, which in the elegant mathematics of lemur development translates to old enough to have opinions about everything but young enough that your joints occasionally remind you they've been keeping track of every questionable decision you've ever made. Your body has settled into middle age with the kind of grace that suggests you're handling the transition well, though your morning routine now includes sounds that didn't used to be part of your wake-up repertoire. The sunrise filters through your territory with the familiar warmth of a relationship that's moved beyond initial excitement into comfortable companionship. You're perched on your thinking branch, the same one you've used for morning contemplation for the past 3 years, conducting your daily assessment of territorial conditions with the systematic thoroughness of someone who's learned that small problems ignored tend to become large problems that require attention at inconvenient times. The realization arrives gradually, like dawn breaking over a landscape you've been navigating without noticing the subtle changes that accumulate over time. Jumping between trees, which once felt like adventure and challenge and proof of your physical competence, now feels more like a necessary task that requires planning and consideration rather than spontaneous enthusiasm. The distances haven't changed, but your relationship with those distances has evolved from exciting challenge to routine transportation requirement. Your morning routine has undergone what you prefer to think of as sophistication rather than acknowledge as accommodation to physical limitations. The warm-up period that now precedes your first tree-to-tree travel of the day has expanded from a quick stretch and assessment to what could charitably be called a comprehensive preparation ritual. You tell yourself it's stretching, but if you're honest, it's really just a 20-minute session of complaining to your joints about their increasingly vocal objections to activities they used to handle without comment. The complaints are specific and personal. Your left shoulder, which sustained a minor injury during an overly ambitious jump in your 2nd year of independence, now provides weather forecasting services by aching approximately 6 hours before significant rain arrives. Your right ankle has developed opinions about the optimal timing for territorial patrol activities, expressing preference for midday warmth over early morning stiffness. Your back has become something of a historian, maintaining detailed records of every time you've slept in less than optimal positions or carried loads that exceeded your lifting specifications. The younger lemurs in your area have begun to treat you with a form of respect that feels simultaneously flattering and mildly insulting. They approach you with the kind of careful attention typically reserved for valuable antiques, acknowledging your significance while being mindful that you might be more fragile than you appear. Their deference is genuine, but it's also the deference shown to furniture that's been in the family for generations, appreciated, respected, and handled with the understanding that replacement would be difficult. You catch them watching your movements with the kind of close attention that suggests they're studying your technique for lessons they can apply to their own future middle age. They observe how you calculate jump distances with more precision than you used to require, how you test branch stability before committing your full weight, and how you've developed the habit of planning rest stops into longer territorial circuits. Their attention isn't unwelcome, but it does make you aware that you've crossed some invisible threshold from adult lemur with experience to senior lemur with accumulated wisdom and potentially valuable advice about surviving to middle age. This transition feels like it happened gradually, then suddenly, like awakening from a nap to discover that the afternoon light has changed quality while you weren't paying attention. Your jump distances have become more conservative through what you prefer to think of as improved judgment rather than declining physical capability. You now calculate trajectories with the kind of safety margins that your younger self would have considered excessive, but your current self recognizes as prudent risk management. The spectacular leaps that once felt essential for maintaining your reputation have been replaced by efficient, reliable transportation that gets you where you need to go without providing entertainment for observers. The most surprising aspect of this physical evolution is how little it actually affects your daily life quality. The adventures you thought you'd miss have been replaced by different forms of satisfaction. The pleasure of executing a perfectly planned territorial circuit, the gratification of resolving problems through experience rather than trial and error, the comfort of knowing your capabilities well enough to work within them efficiently. 7 years of navigating Madagascar's challenges have left you with a comprehensive collection of opinions about virtually every aspect of lemur existence, from optimal fruit ripeness timing to territorial boundary negotiation strategies to the most efficient sleeping positions for different weather conditions. Your accumulated experience has reached the critical mass, where you feel qualified to offer advice on topics ranging from practical survival skills to complex philosophical questions about the nature of existence and the proper relationship between effort and reward. Your advice-giving capabilities have evolved to what could be called professional levels, though your audience consists primarily of insects who happen to be within hearing range, and the occasional lizard who seems to be listening but might just be waiting for you to stop talking so it can continue with whatever lizards do when they're not serving as unwilling counseling clients for middle-aged lemurs with strong opinions about life management. The development of your advisory skills began naturally through interactions with younger lemurs who sought guidance about territorial establishment, foraging strategies, and mate selection. Your initial advice was tentative and practical, based on your direct experience with similar challenges, but as your confidence in your own judgment has grown, your willingness to offer opinions on topics beyond your direct experience has expanded correspondingly. You've become the kind of lemur who remembers when fruit was better and trees were sturdier, though these memories may be influenced by the psychological tendency to recall past experiences more favorably than they actually occurred. Your commentary on contemporary forest conditions includes frequent references to "back in my day" and observations about how current standards of fruit quality, weather, predictability, and territorial respect have declined from the superior conditions you experienced during your formative years. These observations aren't entirely without foundation. You have survived enough seasonal cycles to recognize genuine changes in forest conditions and resource availability, but they're also filtered through the perspective of someone who's accumulated enough experience to have developed preferences and standards that younger lemurs haven't yet had time to develop. What you interpret as declining quality, they might experience as normal variation in environmental conditions. Your relationship with insects during your daily activities has evolved into a form of informal therapy, where you work through complex philosophical questions by explaining your thoughts to creatures who can't interrupt or disagree. A typical afternoon might find you hanging from a comfortable branch, addressing a beetle about the optimal balance between territorial expansion and resource conservation, or explaining to a butterfly your theories about the relationship between individual effort and environmental success. These conversations serve multiple purposes beyond just providing you with an audience for your accumulated wisdom. They help you clarify your own thinking about complex questions, provide practice in articulating ideas that you might later share with other lemurs, and offer a form of social interaction that doesn't require the complex negotiations involved in lemur-to-lemur conversations about territorial boundaries or resource sharing. Your reputation as a source of advice and historical perspective has begun to attract younger lemurs who seek guidance about challenges they're facing in their own territorial establishment and family development. They approach you with the kind of respectful attention that suggests they recognize your experience as valuable, though they also maintain the healthy skepticism that prevents them from accepting all of your opinions as definitive truth. The arrival of your first grand offspring introduces you to a completely new category of life experience that feels like being promoted to a job you didn't apply for and definitely aren't qualified for. Your original offspring have established their own territories and developed their own mating relationships, and they've begun the process of producing the next generation of your family line with the kind of confident incompetence that suggests they've learned nothing from watching your own early parenting struggles. Being a grandparent involves a unique combination of emotional investment and practical detachment that requires skills you didn't know you needed to develop. You care deeply about the welfare of these small creatures who carry your genetic legacy forward, but you're not responsible for their daily survival and development in the same immediate way you were responsible for your own offspring. This creates opportunities for the kind of patient, supportive involvement that was difficult to maintain when you were managing the crisis-to-crisis existence of early parenthood. Your grand offspring make mistakes that seem disturbingly familiar from your own parenting experience, except that they somehow manage to make these familiar mistakes worse through creative applications of inexperience and poor judgment. Watching them attempt basic lemur activities like tree climbing and food selection with spectacular incompetence provides you with a new perspective on your own offspring's early development. Apparently, creative disaster is an inherited family trait that skips no generations. The most challenging aspect of grandparenthood is developing the self-control necessary to resist saying, "I told you so," more than twice per day when your offspring encounter parenting challenges that you warned them about, but they chose to learn through direct experience. Your accumulated wisdom about child rearing is extensive and hard-won, but your offspring approach their parenting responsibilities with the kind of confidence that suggests they believe they can improve on your methods through innovation and optimism. You watch your offspring making the same fundamental mistakes you made during your early parenting years, overprotecting their young in some areas, while underestimating risks in others, responding to normal developmental behaviors as if they were emergencies, and generally approaching parenthood with the kind of intensity that makes everything more difficult than it needs to be. Your attempts to share relevant experience are received with polite attention, and then ignored in favor of experimental approaches that seem designed to rediscover every possible way to make routine tasks unnecessarily complicated. This intergenerational pattern of learning through direct experience rather than accumulated wisdom begins to help you understand why your own parents often look tired and occasionally seem to be suppressing the urge to point out obvious solutions to problems you were determined to solve through trial and error. The perspective of age allows you to see patterns that repeat across generations, but it doesn't provide the ability to transfer that perspective to lemurs who haven't yet accumulated enough experience to appreciate the value of learning from others' mistakes. Your role as a grandparent gradually settles into something that feels sustainable and valuable without being overwhelming. You provide backup support during family emergencies, share your territorial resources when weather or other challenges create shortages, and offer advice when it's requested rather than whenever you think it would be helpful. This approach allows you to maintain positive relationships with your offspring while respecting their autonomy as adult lemurs responsible for their own families. Middle age brings with it an increased tendency toward the kind of reflective thinking that younger lemurs are too busy surviving to engage in, and older lemurs are too tired to maintain. You find yourself spending longer periods engaged in what could be called philosophical contemplation, though it might also be described as simply staring into the distance, while your mind processes 7 years of accumulated experience in search of patterns and meanings that weren't apparent during the more urgent phases of life. These contemplative sessions typically occur during the afternoon hours, when your morning territorial management tasks are complete and your evening activities haven't yet begun. You position yourself in comfortable locations, often hanging upside down from sturdy branches that provide good views of your territory, while supporting extended periods of motionless thinking, and allow your mind to wander through questions that don't have immediate practical applications. Your philosophical investigations cover a range of topics that would probably confuse a philosophy professor, but make perfect sense within the context of 7 years of lemur existence in Madagascar's forests. You spend considerable time thinking about the relationship between effort and reward, wondering whether the energy you invest in territorial maintenance and resource management produces proportional returns in survival and comfort, or whether most of your daily activities serve primarily to maintain the illusion that you have control over environmental factors that are largely beyond your influence. You develop theories about the nature of existence that are based on your direct experience rather than abstract reasoning. One of your primary philosophical insights is that most of the problems you've encountered throughout your adult life have been variations on the same 3 fundamental themes: food, shelter, and not falling. This observation leads you to wonder whether the complexity you perceive in daily life is real, or whether you've been overcomplicating solutions to essentially simple challenges. The food category includes not just the immediate question of what to eat for your next meal, but the broader challenges of resource management, seasonal planning, territorial defense, and the complex social negotiations involved in sharing or protecting food sources. When you examine your major life decisions and sources of stress, most of them can be traced back to questions about obtaining, storing, or defending nutritional resources. The shelter category encompasses everything related to weather survival, sleeping security, territorial establishment, and the ongoing maintenance required to ensure that you have reliable access to protection from environmental challenges. Your territorial development, your choice of mate, your parenting strategies, and your long-term planning all serve primarily to ensure that you and your family have access to adequate shelter under various conditions. The not falling category covers the broad range of physical survival challenges that characterize arboreal life in Madagascar's forests. This includes not just the obvious risks associated with jumping between trees and climbing to unsafe heights, but also the more subtle challenges of maintaining physical fitness, avoiding predators, and managing the accumulated wear and tear that comes from 7 years of navigating a three-dimensional environment that doesn't provide safety nets. These philosophical insights don't necessarily change how you approach daily life, but they provide a framework for understanding why certain activities feel important and others feel optional. When you can trace a current challenge back to one of the 3 fundamental categories, you can apply 7 years of relevant experience rather than treating each new problem as if it's completely novel. Your contemplative periods also include speculation about questions that don't have definitive answers, but provide interesting mental exercise during quiet hours. You wonder about the experiences of other animals in your forest, whether their daily concerns are similar to yours, or whether different species approach survival challenges through completely different mental frameworks. You think about the relationship between individual effort and environmental factors in determining life outcomes, and whether success in lemur existence depends more on skill and planning, or on favorable circumstances and random chance. The afternoon light that filters through the forest canopy during these philosophical sessions creates patterns of shadow and illumination that seem designed to encourage reflective thinking. The gentle movement of leaves in the breeze provides a natural rhythm for contemplation, while the distant sounds of other forest creatures going about their daily business serve as reminders that your small personal existence is part of a much larger system of interconnected lives and relationships. These philosophical moments represent one of the unexpected benefits of reaching middle age, with accumulated wisdom and established territorial security. You're old enough to have perspective on the patterns that shape lemur existence, but young enough that the questions still seem worth exploring. You've solved most of the immediate challenges of survival and established the routines that support daily life, which creates space for the kind of thinking that doesn't serve any immediate practical purpose, but contributes to the overall satisfaction of existence. As the afternoon light begins to shift toward evening, signaling the end of another day in your 7th year of independent life, you conclude your philosophical session and return your attention to the practical concerns of territorial management and family responsibilities. Tomorrow will bring the usual challenges of resource management, social interaction, and environmental adaptation, but today's contemplative hours have added another layer to your understanding of what it means to live successfully as a middle-aged lemur in Madagascar's ancient forests, finding meaning and satisfaction in the careful balance between individual effort and acceptance of forces beyond your control. You're 12 years old now, which in the refined mathematics of lemur, longevity translates to old enough to have witnessed most everything the forest can produce, and experienced enough to have strong opinions about all of it. Your fur has developed, distinguished silver patches that catch the morning light, like badges of survival, and your movements carry the deliberate precision of someone who's learned that efficiency matters more than speed when you're operating on a limited energy budget. You've become the lemur equivalent of that neighbor who's lived in the same house for 40 years, maintained detailed mental records of every significant change in the neighborhood, and developed comprehensive opinions about whether those changes represent progress or decline. Younger lemurs approach you with the respectful attention reserved for living libraries, mainly because you're the only one old enough to remember the last time something resembling their current crisis occurred in local lemur history. Your advisory sessions have become, back in my day, stories part education, part entertainment, often ending with young lemurs politely slipping away mid-sentence. You recognize the telltale glaze in their eyes but persist anyway, believing it's better to share wisdom than let them stumble through preventable mistakes. Your tales cover all aspects of lemur life, disputes resolved through patience, weather survived through ingenuity, and social dynamics that repeat across generations. Though your listeners may focus more on the amusing bits than the lessons, The stories serve their purpose. Your jumping has shifted from graceful leap to calculated fall with good aim. You're more conservative now, assessing wind, branch stability, and backup landing options before attempting any major movement. What some might call aging, you call adaptation. Daily life revolves around a finely tuned nap strategy, maximizing sun exposure, minimizing effort, and keeping just enough awareness to stay informed. Far from laziness, this is advanced energy management. Grooming now consumes half your waking hours, not due to vanity, but because your pace has slowed, turning simple routines into meditative rituals. Your territory has shrunk by choice, as you let go of trees that cost more to maintain than they're worth. What remains is focused. Eat, sleep, and observe. You watch younger lemurs with the patience that comes from experience, offering guidance only when it's asked or clearly needed. You've made peace with mortality. Death no longer looms large, it's just a future event you'll deal with when it arrives. You're too tired for existential dread, and too content to worry about what comes next. Eventually, you realize your family has grown beyond your ability to keep track. Offspring have had their own offspring, expanding your legacy into a future you won't see. But this realization brings pride, not sorrow. You've done your part. One morning, you stretch as usual and feel a quiet sense of accomplishment. You've lived an ordinary life in an extraordinary place, turning overwhelming challenges into routine through years of practice and care. Your final thought is practical, wondering if you left good fruit cached in a forgotten spot. Then you fade like a conversation that's run its course, remembered as the lemur who made survival look easy, even when it wasn't. The forest moves on, indifferent yet shaped by every creature who learned how to live within it. Your space will be claimed, your lessons repeated, your legacy carried quietly, completely, enough.